Illnesses can be real, illnesses can be imagined, and sometimes illnesses can be manufactured. Tonight, we'll step into the unsettling world where caregiving and deceptions collide. A world shaped by three powerful forces: Munchausen by proxy, malingering by proxy, and care eliciting. These behaviours may look similar from the outside, but their motives, their psychology, and their consequence couldn't be more different. And at the centre of this discussion, one of the most infamous modern day cases, the story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. We'll be sifting through these three terms and deciding where Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Dee Dee Blanchard, her mother, sits. This is part 4 of the twisted case files of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. Hello everyone and welcome back to Akatraazz True Crime. I'm Akatraazz, just someone who's really interested in true crime and wants to find other like-minded individuals out there. Today we are on part 4 of our Gypsy Rose Blanchard series, the twisted case files of Gypsy Rose Blanchard. And we're going to be looking at the differences between Munchausen by proxy, malingering by proxy, and care eliciting, and sifting through those terms to see what best fits Gypsy and Dee Dee. As I'm sure we all know, Gypsy Rose Blanchard plotted her own mother's demise, and when charged with the crime, a story came out, one of Munchausen by proxy, severe medical abuse. People have said one of the most severe cases they've ever heard of. But when we look at the evidence, is that the case? I'll leave that up to you to work out. So we'll start with Munchausen by proxy, and Munchausen by proxy is a mental health disorder in which a caregiver, usually a parent, fabricates, exaggerates, or induces illnesses in someone under their care, most often a child. It's not misunderstanding, it's not overprotectiveness.
I mean, I used to always think that maybe she's a little overprotective. And so if I had to say one word about her, it would be overprotective. My mom tended to be overprotective.
It is medical child abuse. Imagine a caregiver who appears endlessly devoted, always at the hospital, always at the child's side, yet they are the very reason their child is sick. The love we see on the outside is only performance. This is one of the most disturbing forms of child abuse and one of the hardest to detect and diagnose. Munchausen by proxy was defined first in 1977, although most likely existed many years prior when a British paediatrician, Dr. Roy Meadow, first introduced the term. In 1951, Dr. Richard Asher had coined the term Munchausen syndrome to describe adults who fabricated illnesses in themselves, and Dr. Meadow extended Asher's concept to situations of the caregiver imposing this on another, and now it's known as factitious disorder imposed by another. But because we're looking into the case of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and she herself will use the term Munchausen by proxy, that's what we're going to be using throughout this. But I thought it was helpful if we went to the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which has a very precise definition. The DSM-5 places this disorder under the category of somatic symptom and related disorders, conditions where physical symptoms are exaggerated, manipulated, or misunderstood. But in this case, the symptoms don't belong to the person with the disorder, they belong to someone else. Factitious disorder posed on another describes a situation where a caregiver, usually a parent, deliberately falsifies, exaggerates, or induces illnesses in someone under their care. The deception is intentional, and the harm is real, and the motivation is internal, a psychological need to be seen as the devoted, suffering caregiver. According to the DSM-5, several criteria must be met before this diagnosis can be made. First, the caregiver must fabricate or induce symptoms in another person. This means lying about symptoms, manipulating medical tests, or causing actual physical harm. Second, the behaviour must involve clear deception. This isn't confusion or misunderstanding, it's deliberate. Third, the caregiver repeatedly presents the victim as ill, injured or impaired, often insisting on medical tests, treatments or hospitalizations. Fourth, and most importantly, there must be no external reward. No insurance payout, no legal advantage. The motivation is emotional, attention, sympathy and validation. And finally, the behaviour cannot be better explained by another mental disorder, such as psychosis or delusional beliefs. The DSM-5 makes this explicit. The perpetrator receives the diagnosis, but the victim, often a child, receives the harm. The harm can include unnecessary medications, invasive procedures, and years of psychological trauma. Clinicians also look for behaviour patterns that support the diagnosis, symptoms that appear only in the caregiver's presence, a medical history full of contradictions, a caregiver who seems unusually calm during crises, or unusually eager for tests. And, in some cases, a child who improves dramatically when separated from the caregiver. Dr. Mark Feldman, who is one of the world's leading experts on the disorder, describes it as a form of child abuse in which the caregiver seeks attention, sympathy or admiration by presenting the child as ill. And this is the key. The illness isn't the goal, the attention is. Perpetrators of Munchausen by proxy often appear calm, cooperative and deeply involved in their child's care. They know medical terminology, how to speak to doctors, and know how to tell a story that sounds just believable enough. Hospitals become their stage, doctors their audience, and the poor child their prop. Symptoms may mysteriously appear only when the caregiver is present. Medical tests may come back normal, yet the caregiver insists something is wrong. They may move doctor to doctor, searching for someone who won't question them, a behaviour known as doctor shopping. To outsiders, they look like heroes, but behind closed doors, they are the source of the suffering. Many perpetrators have an intense need for validation. They thrive on the sympathy they receive from friends, family, and medical staff. Being seen as the devoted parent of a sick child becomes central to their identity, and without this role they feel invisible, unimportant, or emotionally empty. Some have a personal history of trauma, neglect, or emotional instability. Others have their own Munchausen syndrome, meaning they would have faked or induced illnesses in themselves before turning that behaviour outward onto their child. Psychologists have noted that Munchausen by proxy often overlaps with traits of borderline or narcissistic personality disorders, where emotional needs are overwhelming and self-image is fragile. Munchausen by proxy stands apart from this and goes further because they inflict harm on someone else who is vulnerable, dependent, and unable to speak up. Dr. Mark Feldman has said these individuals are not motivated by money or practical gain, they are motivated by emotional reinforcement. Another way to phrase this, attention is their addiction. For the child, the experience is confusing, frightening, and often traumatic. They may undergo countless medical tests, procedures, and hospital stays, all for conditions that were not real. Some grow up believing they are chronically ill, because that's the story they were raised with. Survivors describe a deep sense of betrayal. The person supposed to protect them and keep them safe was the one causing the harm, and the medical system, which should have safeguarded them, was the place where the abuse happened. The psychological scars can last a lifetime. Anxiety, mistruth, identity confusion, and post-traumatic stress are all common. Munchausen by proxy is notoriously difficult to uncover. Caregivers often appear loving and attentive, and doctors naturally assume parents are telling the truth. Symptoms may be subtle or inconsistent, and the child is often too young to speak for themselves. This disorder is often discovered only when patterns emerge. Symptoms that never occur outside the caregiver's presence, medical results that don't match the reported illness, or a history of unexplained medical issues in siblings. A few infamous cases of Munchausen by proxy are Lacey Spears, Mary Beth Tinning, and Beverly Allett. Lacey Spears was known as a devoted young mother who documented every moment of her son Garnett's life. To her followers online, she appeared loving, attentive, and heartbreakingly unlucky. A mother whose child was consistently ill for no reason. for reasons no doctor could explain. But behind the curated photos and emotional posts was a far darker truth. Investigators later discovered that Garnett's illnesses were not mysterious at all. They were inflicted. Lacey had been poisoning him with dangerously high levels of sodium, a pattern that escalated until his death in 2014. What made the case especially chilling was the way she used social media as a stage, crafting a narrative for herself as a suffering mother in need of sympathy and support. The case of Mary Beth Tinning. Mary Beth Tinning lost 9 children between the 1970s and 80s, each death initially attributed to sudden infant death syndrome, genetic issues, or tragic coincidence. Doctors struggled to understand how someone could suffer so many losses, but then the truth finally emerged. The deaths were not accidents. Mary Beth was convicted of murdering her 9th child, Tammy Lynn, in 1985. Although she was only charged with that single case, it's clearly suspected that the other children suffered a similar fate. Not all experts classify Mary Beth as having Munchausen by proxy. However, her behaviour patterns of repeatedly presenting her children as gravely ill or dying, and receiving waves of sympathy and attention, aligns with the psychological dynamics of the disorder. Her case illustrates how Munchausen by proxy can escalate to fatal outcomes when warning signs go unnoticed for years. And finally, the case of Beverly Allett. Beverly Allett was a paediatric nurse in Lincolnshire, England, trusted, soft-spoken, and seemingly dedicated to the children in her care. But in 1991, a series of medical emergencies began unfolding on her ward. Infants and young children who had been stable suddenly went into cardiac arrest, stopped breathing, or suffered unexplainable collapses. Over the course of just 2 months, Allett murdered 4 children and attempted to kill 9 others. Investigators later found she had injected the victims with insulin and other substances that caused catastrophic reactions. Psychiatrists identified her as having Munchausen by proxy, using her position as a nurse to create medical crises that placed her at the centre of the attention and urgency. So we're now going to move on to malingering by proxy, and this is where a caregiver lies about a child's illness, and when most people think about that, they think of what we've just gone through. Munchausen by proxy. However, this is another lesser known form of deception that looks very similar on the surface, yet has a very different motive. Malingering by proxy is not a mental disorder. It's a deliberate act of deception carried out by a caregiver who exaggerates, fabricates, or induces illnesses in someone, usually a child, for external gain. With malingering by proxy, the goal isn't sympathy, it's advantage. A caregiver may claim a child is sick to obtain financial benefits, disability payments, legal leverage, school accommodations, or access to resources they wouldn't otherwise receive. The child becomes a mean to an end. So externally, it is very similar to Munchausen by proxy. Both involve deception, exaggerating, fabricating illnesses in a child. However, the distinction is the motive. Is the person causing the harm after attention, sympathy, accolades, or are they after real, tangible benefits? So now we've discussed those two, I want to talk about Dee Dee Blanchard for a bit. Now, bearing in mind, Dee Dee Blanchard is no longer alive with us, so she can't actually be diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy, but we can still look at her behaviour patterns and see what fits. And certainly there are elements of Munchausen by proxy. From people who lived in the communities, Dee Dee very much did parade Gypsy round and she liked being in the spotlight, probably enjoying the attention and sympathy she got from others. However, and this is very important, even in the DSM-5 it states, most importantly, there must be no external reward, no insurance payout, no legal advantage. The motivation is simply emotional for attention, sympathy, and validation. So we can see straight off the bat there is definite, tangible benefits of Dee Dee's behaviour.
Of a long financial fraud scheme.
The family got medical airlift, Disney travel, and free housing over the years because of Gypsy's supposed disabilities.
It was a facade that translated online. Donations pouring in for Gypsy's reported muscular dystrophy and leukemia.
they got Habitat for Humanity house. And some of this is jumping to and from in the timeline, but I think it's important to go over, and anyone who knows the case well will know about these things. So after Hurricane Katrina, Dee Dee and Gypsy got Habitat for Humanity house. They got life flighted out of Louisiana. They met celebrities who gave donations. They went to charity fundraisers. They spent a lot of time at the Ronald McDonald House. They had Make-A-Wish. They went on trips to Disneyland.
This past January, I got a chance to meet some of the cats. Because my mom and I went on vacation to Universal Studios.
Okay, so the Harry Potter land now?
Yes, and it was the Harry Potter Expo. So I got to meet the girl that plays Luna. I got to meet the twins, the Weasley twins.
Really?
Dumbledore and Hagrid. My mom and I bought the exclusive package, and that gives you one special night that they shut down the parks to where you and only the people that bought that package are let in. It's closed off to everyone else.
So it's like the VIP experience.
And they have this special event where they bring food out, and you can go walk around, eat free ice cream, and it's just the whole thing to yourself.
Really? How many people do they give that to? Is it noticeably
I think
less
it's
crowded?
100 packages that they sell. And they had a lot of people that didn't get the experience that me and my mom did, because a lot of people were rushing to get the autographs. On the package it said that you get a guaranteed meet and greet. That's actually not true.
Okay.
You have to go to the park, and at 7 o'clock in the morning, they hand out passes.
Okay.
Only one pass to each person to get an autograph. But it's first come, first serve. So there was people lining up at like 3 a.m. to get a pass, and people were climbing over each other and fighting for it and things like this. But my mom and I just talked to guest relations, and they were able to we made friends with actually one of the people that tell the celebrities like where they have to be, where they have to go and things like that.
Right.
So I guess one of the big important people we made friends with, so it was we got
Hey,
to
that's a good
have
person to make friends with. You guys are smart.
yeah, we got to spend like 2 hours with them.
And then at Disney World, I got to go to Magic Kingdom, and I went and danced the waltz with Prince Charming and Cinderella.
Really?
That was really fun. My mom and I got the Disney dining plan, which is unlimited food. A human being cannot eat this much food.
Too much food?
And we went and ate at Chef Mickey's. I had way too much sugar. Whenever you go anywhere in Disney, they try to pump you with sugar.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of the night, it was closing time. I was so filled with sugar that I was dancing up and down Main Street at Magic Kingdom. And then, it's funny because the park was all closed. The castle was there. And, I go through the castle and I touch the railing and I'm like, there's nobody else here.
There was a lot of tangible gain that they got from Gypsy's illnesses. But I want to go over something else as well, because there are cases where doctors have suspected Munchausen by proxy, and the child actually just had a rare, misunderstood condition, and their concerned parent was painted as a monster. One of these cases that has become very well known from the Netflix documentary Take Care of Maya is the case of Maya Kowalski, who entered a Florida hospital in 2016 in excruciating pain. Her rare medical condition, complex regional pain syndrome, or CRPS, was real, it was documented and diagnosed and previously treated. But what happened next would tear her family apart. Doctors at the hospital questioned Maya's symptoms, doubted her diagnosis, and soon turned their suspicions towards her mother Beta. What began as a medical evaluation spiraled into accusation that Beta was fabricating or exaggerating her daughter's illness. a claim of suspected Munchausen by proxy. Maya was removed from her family's care, Beata was barred from seeing her daughter, and as the weeks turned into months, the emotional toll became unbearable. And, unfortunately, it ended with Beata taking her own life because she thought if she removed herself, then the hospital would finally give Maya the care she needed. It's a really sad case, and like I said, there is a whole documentary on it. This was just a brief overview, and there's a lot more to it, so I urge anyone who's interested to go and watch that. And this isn't the only case. There have been tons of families ripped apart because doctors have suspected that parents who fight for their child who either had an unknown or rare diagnosis were painted with the Munchausen by proxy brush, and their child was removed from them. If anyone knows of the creator 1980s millennial commentates on here, she is from the Missouri community and her family and friends actually knew Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose Blanchard, so she has quite a good idea of how they were when Dee Dee was still alive. She's a great source of information, and she's actually made quite a few videos on Munchausen by proxy and the cases that were deemed as Munchausen by proxy that weren't Munchausen by proxy. She also goes over Dr. Mark Feldman. I would just urge people to go check out her channel because she does a really good job, and like I said, she has really good information. So could we apply this to Dee Dee and Gypsy? Well, we know that Gypsy had a rare chromosomal disorder, and this wasn't known about for years, so even if doctors suspected something was wrong, they wouldn't have been able to give it a name. And when she was finally tested and diagnosed, well, medical records show that hospital visits calmed down, medical tests calmed down, and surely in someone with Munchausen by proxy, they would grab hold of this and run with it. It seems like Dee Dee just kind of got the answers she was searching for and went away. Another thing that has been claimed about Dee Dee is that she doctor shopped. Gypsy has claimed this, and also Christy Blanchard, her stepmother, has claimed that Dee Dee and Gypsy saw over 100 doctors. Again, from the medical records, we see this isn't really true. Yes, Gypsy saw multiple doctors, but she usually only had one primary care doctor. And I don't know about you, but when you go to the doctor and you have an issue, the primary care doctors can only do so much and they will refer you on to specialists. This isn't doctor shopping, it's normal procedure. Dr. Mark Feldman has appeared on documentaries to comment on the case.
Is consistently and viciously subjected to, in my opinion, Munchausen by proxy as anyone I've come across.
And you might be thinking, oh, well, the expert in Munchausen by proxy says this is Munchausen by proxy. You know, if it walks and talks like a duck, it's probably a duck. But then you realise that Dr. Mark Feldman, he didn't read the medical records. He got his information from what was in the media. And when we go through later parts, we're going to show what was in the media and how the deception took off. So this is when we move on to malingering. Did Dee Dee malinger? Yes, I think it's pretty clear to see that they did. I've already gone over all the stuff they got from Gypsy's illnesses, and yes, this could still be harmful to the child, and no, when Gypsy was a child, she wouldn't have had a part in this. But Dee Dee's life was ended when Gypsy was 23 years old. So that's 5 years she wasn't a child. And many more years that she probably could have stood up and said something to the doctors. Gypsy would have known all the benefits they got if she knew she wasn't really sick. She says, I knew I could walk and I knew I could eat. We've already kind of gone over the eating thing because, like I said, even if you've got feeding issues, which the medical record shows that she failed a swallow study and she had failure to thrive and spent a month in a feeding hospital for further testing, where Dee Dee wouldn't have been around her 24/7. So she did have feeding issues. She probably did need the feeding tube after all those tests. I'm going to take an educated guess and say she did need it. But again, with a feeding tube, you can still take small amounts of food in orally. The feeding tube is for supplemental nutrition, so you get adequate amount. But say Gypsy's version of why she was in a wheelchair is the truth. She got into a small motorbike accident and her mother took advantage of this and put her in the wheelchair, and all of a sudden they got financial benefits. They got to live a great life that Dee Dee wouldn't have been able to provide as a single mother with a sick child to Gypsy on her own. Gypsy would have known she could walk. So I don't believe that she didn't understand what was going on. Obviously, at a certain age she wouldn't have done, but when she grew up she would have. But then the video that she sent to Nicholas Godejohn before the crime comes into play. You know, the one we talked about last episode, where she admits to Nicholas that she can walk and that she had been lying to him. But not only him, lying to everyone. And not just everyone in the community, everyone including her mother Dee Dee. She said her mother didn't even know she could walk until 2011.
I'm sorry to keep it a secret from you for so long, but it's not just you that I'm keeping it a secret from. It's sort of like everybody who knows me. I don't even know how I got started. When I was 6 years old, I went into the hospital for like 6 months, and the doctors told me that I had a seizure in surgery, and I wouldn't be able to walk, that I was paralyzed permanently. And that part, like the part that I had a seizure, was true. In surgery, I had the seizure and I was paralyzed. But what they didn't know is that it was temporary paralysis and not permanent. And by the time I started to get my feeling back in my legs, and I hadn't tried to walk then, but I was too young and I just kept to myself. And throughout the years, I tried to tell my mom a few times, and I guess I was just afraid of her not loving me as much as she does if I couldn't walk. You know, I didn't want to make her sad or lose any love from her. I guess that's the reason why I kept it a secret from her. And so I just kept it to myself for a long time until 2011.
Last episode I said I didn't really know what to make of this because I don't believe anything Gypsy says. All the other videos and everything else she says, all her other interviews, I hold her to that standard. So it would be unfair for me to watch this video and just think this is the one time she's telling the truth. However, I do think sometimes in her statements there are nuggets of truth in there. And mulling over this in my head, I said I acknowledge that this was part of a wider manipulation of Nicholas Godejohn. Like all the videos she sent him, we can see the manipulation, so I had to think about it in terms of that. But mulling it over, I really don't know what this would have been used for to manipulate him. The video in itself could be seen as manipulative. I mean, she's dressed up as her little girl character, she's got the high voice, she's kind of painting it out as, well, you know, this happened and then I couldn't really come clean and I can't really come clean now because everyone's going to hate me. You know, it was very much minimizing her part in it all. It's just kind of like, well, it just happened and it's been so long and it's spiraled out of control and I can't really do anything, but I'm telling you, you're the first person who knows. And that other person who's not in my life anymore, but forget him because you're the only person who knows. You know, all of her videos are very much love bomby, but anyway, there is clear manipulation in the video itself. However, I don't understand what the motive would be for telling him this if there wasn't some truth in it. And come on, after you commit the crime of murder, I'm gonna believe what you say before the murder compared to what comes out after the murder, especially when what comes out after the murder is specifically going to benefit you in the legal system. So this is where we move on to Care Eliciting, and this is where we're going to be talking about Gypsy and relating this to her behaviour. For quite some time, I have believed that Gypsy Rose Blanchard care elicits from people, and we'll go through what this is. So human beings are wired for connection. From the moment we're born, we rely on others to keep us safe, fed, and comforted. And built into that dependency is a powerful behaviour to keep us safe, one that psychologists call care eliciting. Care eliciting is a natural set of behaviours that we use to signal distress, vulnerability, or need, prompting others to respond with protection or support. Now, care eliciting itself isn't wrong. It's somewhat instinctual. It's how we communicate we need help. However, in some cases, care eliciting becomes exaggerated, chronic, or strategically used. Some learn this behaviour who have experienced trauma, neglect, or inconsistent caregiving. They may learn that only extreme distress gets a response. Others may develop patterns where illness, crisis, or vulnerability becomes their primary way of connecting to others. Experts emphasise that care eliciting itself is not pathological, it's universal. What becomes concerning is when the need for care overwhelms the boundary of healthy behaviour. In healthy relationships, care eliciting is balanced. When care eliciting becomes the primary or only way someone knows how to get an emotional connection, it can spiral into patterns of crisis seeking, exaggeration, or dependency. And I'm just going to go over a few examples of dangerous patterns of care eliciting. So first is exaggerating distress to keep someone else close. A person might amplify their sadness, anxiety, or physical discomfort because they fear abandonment. They may say things like, "I can't cope unless you're here," even when they could manage on their own. Second, creating frequent crises to maintain attention. Someone may repeatedly present themselves as overwhelmed, in danger, or on the verge of collapse because they've learned that crisis brings connection. This is crisis-driven care eliciting, and it can exhaust relationships. Third, using illness as a primary way to receive support. A person may constantly talk about symptoms, seek medical attention for minor issues, or frame themselves as fragile to ensure others stay attentive. This is illness-based dependency, and it can become a pattern. Fourth, repeated reassurance seeking that never resolves. Asking, "Do you still care about me?" or "Are you upset with me?" once in a while is normal. But when it becomes constant, dozens of times a day, it signals attachment insecurity rather than genuine need. 5. Appearing helpless to avoid responsibility. Someone may act incapable of basic tasks, not because they truly can't do them, but because helplessness reliably brings support, sympathy, or rescue. This is learned helplessness used as relational strategy. 6. Emotional collapse when boundaries are set. If a person becomes dramatically distressed, whenever someone sets a limit, crying, panicking, or shutting down, it can be a form of boundary punishing care eliciting, even if unintentional.
But whenever you put out text messages between you and I that I think are sacred, that should, in my opinion, be sacred between us. And when I mean sacred, I mean that there are very few people I trust in this world. And I have always counted you as one of them. So whenever I reached out to you when I was 2 weeks postpartum, and I didn't know how to handle my emotions. I just had a baby. My whole life changed. My literal whole life changed in an instant. And I don't regret having Aurora. I don't. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. But I leaned on you. I leaned on you because I trust you. That is not something a lot of people I can say about. When I felt distant from Ken during those first few weeks postpartum, I vented to you. I told you everything that was on my heart and in my head. And I thought that that was gonna stay between us. Did I tell Ken? Eventually I did. But I never aimed to hurt you. It was never about hurting you. It was always about what the public might think, the public persona. And I think what gets to me, and I vented this to your mom, is that you have your TikTok personality, and then you have the real Ryan Anderson. And those two are two completely different people. So when I see you on TikTok, acting the way you do, talking the way you do, doing your polls, that's not the man that I married. The man that I married went on Facebook once a month because I asked him to. You didn't do social media. You didn't care. It was never about the public back then. And it's so hard to see what you have become. So yeah, I get mad, I get frustrated, I get angry because I know that that's not you.
7. Pulling others into a caretaker role. A person may consistently position themselves as one who needs saving, comforting, or stabilizing, even in situations where mutual support could be healthier. This creates one-sided emotional labor. And if you're like me, reading through that list, how many of them, or how many examples rather, of Gypsy Rose's behaviour can you correlate with that list? I thought of multiple times that I have seen of her for every single one on that list. And I'm gonna go into this in a later video in more detail, but there have been arguments made by content creators that Gypsy Rose fits the criteria for narcissistic and antisocial personality disorder, and I think there's definitely an argument that could be made for this. So just on that fact, obviously we'll go into that in a later video on why an argument could be made for this, but just for the purposes of this exercise, I'm going to look at a way narcissists and people with antisocial behaviour use care eliciting. So people with narcissistic traits can often use care eliciting strategically, not instinctively. Their version of care eliciting tends to be self-focused, intermittent, tied to ego protection, and activated when their self-image feels threatened. For example, someone with narcissistic traits might express exaggerated distress when they feel ignored, become suddenly fragile when confronted, use illness or emotional collapse to pull attention back to themselves, portray themselves as misunderstood, mistreated, or victimized to gain sympathy. And people with antisocial traits may use care eliciting behaviours in a calculated instrumental way, not because they feel vulnerable, but because it helps them achieve a goal. Examples include pretending to be injured or distressed to avoid consequences, acting helpless to manipulate someone into doing something for them, using emotional displays to gain trust or sympathy, feigning remorse or sadness to influence legal or interpersonal outcomes.
Done. You're obviously going to keep telling me lies.
I'm
so
not, I'm not, sir.
about it.
I'm
Okay.
not, sir.
All right. Now you're going to be booked in for, later on down the line, you're going to be booked in for probably murder, okay? As long as, and with him as well, okay? All right?
I didn't murder my mom, sir.
Listen to me.
Sir,
Listen
I
to me.
didn't.
You did, because you're behind it. You pulled all the strings on it,
I did.
and you're behind it.
I
I'm not, listen, Gypsy, I'm not going to sit and argue with you about it, okay?
All I wanted was him
So-
to come and get me.
No, that's not all you wanted. There's a lot more to this whole story that you're leaving out. I'm not going to play the sympathetic game. I'm not like that, okay? I can see right through it, okay?
Please, I'm not able to be in jail. I have a lot of medical needs.
I understand that, and they'll get taken care of.
I did not.
I am kind of stunned because there's just so many moments that come to mind that could be tied to that, related to the crime, related to her life with Dee Dee, and related to her life now. So I'm going to leave you with those thoughts and this information. Make your own opinions up on it, but this is why so many people are fighting for the truth to come out, because there is evidence that Dee Dee did malinger, but there's also evidence that she didn't have Munchausen by proxy. There's evidence that her malingering actually benefited Gypsy. There's evidence that Gypsy had real medical need. And if Dee Dee was malingering that real medical need to get her child these advantages, to give her child a good life, is she the monster that the media and her own killer has painted her into? And is the killer, ironically, actually the one who has care elicited for their own self-beneficial gain? all this time while saying their mother abused them for sympathy and attention. That's where we're going to end today's episode. Thank you for watching, and if you like the content, please like and subscribe to my channel. I would love to find like-minded people out there. I would love to hear your comments down below on what you think and your opinions. Like I said, I want you to make your own mind up. I have my opinions, but I want everyone to come to their own conclusion and let me know down below. In part 5, we'll be going into Hurricane Katrina. See you there.